It's only right to start with the situation in Ukraine. As these Russian troops are retreating from the areas around Kyiv, we've been confronted with the true horrors of what has happened. How do we respond to what we're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I've been speaking to my opposite number last night, Alexander Kubrikov, who's the infrastructure minister in Ukraine. He's in Kyiv. He was describing some of those scenes from his colleagues, and the world cannot just look the other way. And I think it's actually a terrible wake-up call for the world, both in terms of what Putin has done and human rights and the suffering, and also, as your previous interviewer was just saying, with the supply of energy to the West, which is largely funding and continues to fund this war effort. So horrendous. Our hearts are with everybody involved. They are considering what's going on. Talking to my ministerial opposite, Kubrikov, he is very, very determined. Actually wanted to speak to me last night about the rebuilding of their country when this is all over. So I think they believe and are optimistic that they'll win this war and push Putin back.
The thing that sort of strikes me is that the only reason that we're actually seeing the full scale of what's happened is because Russia has been pushed out of these areas. There hasn't effectively been time for a cover-up. In the conversations that you've been having, what have people been witnessing?
Unfortunately, I've also been hearing it firsthand, speaking to Ukrainians as well separately, and it's quite clearly horrendous. It's harrowing, in fact. We have a family who are going to come live with us, but their child was in a bunker, a shelter overnight for several nights in Kyiv, and now when he's playing, he's talking about and they're in relative safety right now, but he is playing make-believe about building bomb shells, and can you hear the bombs outside my bombshell and this sort of thing. So bomb shelter. So it's a horrendous picture, and of course will leave many scars. But I should say the determination, from what I've seen of Ukrainian people and their government to rebuild the country. I mean, remarkably, the conversation last night was specifically organised because he wanted to talk about how they would get city design back in to rebuild some of those flattened cities that you've seen on the television screens, like Mariupol and elsewhere, and which is extraordinary given the war is still going on, but such is their determination to win this and push Putin back, and I think they will.
Just on the war crimes question, of course, do you need to see this? Do you think that this all needs to go to the ICC?
Well, I think it's absolutely right that this is all properly documented. This matters. We've seen in war before. It matters that this is documented and that cases are capable of being brought to international justice. So I think it's incredibly important, almost regardless of what happens in the end, that the world notes. And frankly, we've seen this. I'm afraid we've seen this behaviour from Putin now a number of different times, not just in 2014 in Syria. In 2013 in Syria, but in 2014 in Ukraine, in Crimea, and elsewhere. So it is quite clear that we must document this. The world must take note. I think it is, and I think it's very, very important that we continue to provide our full backing to the people of Ukraine, not only the people of Ukraine, but because the flight to Ukraine is roughly the same as flying to Turkey or Greece. It really is on our doorstep in Europe, and we all know what happens if Putin isn't stopped there.
What is the latest intelligence on the actual military situation? Because it feels like things are quite conflicted. Russia reportedly withdrawing from some areas, refocusing on other areas. We've obviously had the explosions in the port of Odessa that have come overnight. Is Russia withdrawing or is it regrouping?
It's more complicated than withdrawing. I mean, it is as ever with war, there's a lot of fog of war, but it's also the case that this has been a very disorganized campaign. We all saw the 40-kilometer long vehicle into Kyiv that was trying to attack from the north, and then that broke apart. We saw on day one Putin's forces try to get to a particular airfield to the northwest of Kyiv. They've now withdrawn from that. That's gone backwards and forwards lots of times. Having said that, you only have to glance at a map to see that not only does Putin still have the territory he'd already seized illegally in 2014, but he's also expanded that around the Donbass and is desperately trying to link up his troops and indeed flattening everywhere in between, like Mariupol, which has been largely wiped off the earth. So it's a mixed picture, I would say, quite clearly not gone to plan, not gone to Putin's plan, that is, and there is clearly some regrouping going on, but this is not over by any extent. And of course, the Ukrainians should be able to decide their own destiny. It's not for an outside neighbour to come in and tell them how they reorganise their country. Completely unprovoked, completely without warrant attack on their country.
Let's look now, shall we, at what we can actually do. Sanctions, of course, is one part of the picture, and you mentioned there the sort of energy side of this. So the EU has spent 18 billion euros on Russian oil and gas since the 24th of February, which was when the war began. The Russian ruble has, perhaps unsurprisingly given that, recovered nearly all of the losses incurred since that invasion started. I mean, earlier this week, you posted a picture of yourself outside a confiscated yacht. I mean, a few confiscated yachts, frankly, are not going to make any difference, are they? While Europe is bankrolling Russia to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars every day.
Well, I think it is. First of all, it's absolutely true, and we may come on to discuss this, that the price of freedom and defending democracy in this case and doing the right thing, it doesn't come cost-free. I suspect we're about to discuss the cost of living. So there's a flip side to doing all these things, and that is where, more so for Europe, who are particularly in countries like Germany, incredibly reliant on Russian fuel, have been finding it very difficult to cut off that fuel. Now, we've said that in the next 9 months, I guess 8 months now, we will stop buying Russian fuel entirely. None of our petrol's from Russia. About 18% of our diesel is, and there's some fuel that goes to other purposes, but we have a relatively low reliance. The problem for Europe is there are very large amounts, as you've just described, being purchased in Russian fuel. They've said they'll try and cut that by a third within a year. And all of it eventually. It is very, very important we carry on down this route because, as you rightly say, you can have all the sanctions in the world. And by the way, I think it is important to sanction the oligarchs who've been very close to Putin, which is why I've been taking not just the super yacht that you mentioned, but several aircraft, including another aircraft this morning, and freezing them. But it is also very, very important that we're not paying back cash into their system, because that money will go to fund a war effort in Ukraine. And you described the devastation and the human suffering in your opening. So it's very, very important that we close that loop. Britain is urging countries to go further and faster on this. And again, I hear this directly from my Ukrainian counterpart to the British people. He says where the Brits go, they pioneer, and the rest of the world is following with regard to providing help and support to Ukraine.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because as you say, the sanctions don't come cost-free to people in the UK. And I think it's important to say as well that a lot of the cost of living issues were here before the war began, but it is right to say that it's also exacerbated it. You know, we're about to see the biggest fall in living standards since records began. 400,000 more children being pushed into poverty, according to the Resolution Foundation. I mean, these numbers are so big, it's actually hard to get your head around them. Given the fact we're committed to these sanctions, the Chancellor is going to have to come back with more help for people who are on the breadline, isn't he?
And this is genuinely the flip side of both coming out of coronavirus and seeing the economy take off again, the fastest growing economy in the G7 in Britain last year, but also exacerbated massively by these fuel price increases, which feed through to everything. So it's very, very tough. You only have to look at the price of the pump or the cost of heating a home, and you see the extent to which the prices have leapt up. And the Chancellor so far has come forward with a £22 billion budget. That's billion, not million. 22 billion package to try to assist people as we go through this difficult period, including 9.1 billion of it, which is specific to the energy side of things. We absolutely want to look to do everything we can.
400,000 more children in poverty. I understand you can't fix everything, but is the Chancellor going to have to come back with more, in your opinion?
I get, I don't want to sort of get everyone lost in, get us lost in numbers here. But poverty is divided into both absolute and relative positive, and sometimes the way it's presented can be somewhat misleading, to say the least. What we're trying to do, though, is make sure that, for example, if somebody is working on a minimum wage, for example, 16 hours,
I do
maybe
need to
a
come in at this
single
point
parent, that they're
because
better
we're
off rather
seeing
than worse off.
8.7% peak in inflation. Energy bills are going up by an astronomical amount. It is absolutely correct to say that there are many, many families in the country, up and down, many people watching this programme today, who are going to be seriously worried about how to feed their children, how to heat their homes in the winter. My question is,
I don't.
I'm not getting lost in numbers. My question is, is the Chancellor going to have to come back and do more to help these people? Because this is what people want to know. They're worried.
So first of all, I do not mean to, in any way, shape, or form, underplay it, because you don't have to be an expert. You just look at the cost of living, as you mentioned, the increase in inflation. I think you quoted RPI rather than CPI, but nonetheless, it's very substantial. And that's why the Chancellor's already come forward with £22 billion. And I want to just pick up one figure, which
For
I think
quoting
does
RPI,
give.
I apologise for quoting RPI rather than CPI inflation.
But that's fine. But it's very high increase.
I'm glad that you're saying that it's fine. That's very reassuring. But for the sake of the people who are very concerned about how they're going to feed their children and heat their homes, do you think the Chancellor will come back with more help?
Well, as I say, the track record is already come forward with a lot of help, including more help just last week.
No
The point
more
I was
help
going
is
to
needed.
make is, Sophia, if I can just get to the end, there's one point I think would be helpful for viewers, which is to say, the one thing which has been remarkable because of the help that was given during coronavirus is unemployment is down to 3.9%. Vacancies are higher than before coronavirus, and more people are in work than ever before. And in the end, that is the way that we're going to most put money in people's pockets, whilst at the same time making sure that people will be able to earn all of
Many of these people are in work, though, it's right to
without
say.
paying national insurance.
Many people on universal credit in work, it's right to say.
So as I said, I don't want to in any way, shape, or form minimise this, because it's a very, very big, serious problem. And you're right to say it's been a global problem, as is that inflation that we're seeing everywhere throughout the world. However, I was going on before to say that for somebody who is on universal credit, because of the way that the Chancellor has amended tapers, it means that somebody would be left with more money in their pockets. And the way that he's amended national insurance also means that people will end up with more money in their pocket, and that national insurance change is coming in very shortly as well. So we're trying to do what we can. You're asking if we'll do more. I want to absolutely be clear. Given the Chancellor's record, I'm sure he'll always be looking what else he can do. And he's already provided billions and billions of pounds to try to relieve the pressure. And I accept that we cannot do everything. I'd love for us to be able to do absolutely everything. These are global pressures. And one of the best things we can do is make sure we have a vibrant economy with very low unemployment.
OK, we'll be seeing the Prime Minister's energy strategy next week. What will be in it to help people who are worried about how to keep warm?
It's really important that we spread the variety of ways in which we create energy in this country, and indeed in the world, because we've seen what happens when somebody like Putin gets hold of that energy supply. So next week in the energy strategy, we'll be looking for a greater mix of different ways to produce our energy, which do not rely on imported hydrocarbons, the gas and oil side of things, particularly from Russia. So you might expect to see more small nuclear reactors, nuclear power. You might expect to see more offshore wind power. Those, I think, would be the things to look for, more solar as well.
Interesting that you're focusing there on the nuclear and the offshore wind. Of course, the issue with nuclear is that even according to the government's own impact assessment, it takes 13 to 17 years for electricity to be generated by a new nuclear plant. Do you think planning laws should be relaxed to allow more onshore wind farms as well?
Well, just on nuclear, modular reactors are likely to be one of the important ways forward. And we have already produced modular reactors. They already exist in submarines. So I think there may be other technologies which can be moved along faster. I don't favour a vast increase in onshore wind farms for pretty obvious reasons. They sit on the hills there and can create something of an eyesore for communities, as well as actual problems of noise as well. I think for reasons of environmental protection, the way to go with this is largely, not entirely, but largely off sea. I went out to to installation off the northeast coast recently, and it is incredibly impressive. Not widely known, but Britain's got more off-sea, offshore wind power than any other country in the world, and I think we could do with expanding that further still.
So just to sort of clarify, your understanding is that an idea of like a big increase in the number of onshore wind farms, that's effectively off the table for now, is it?
Well, I'd urge you to wait for the energy strategy later in the week, but my thinking is what you really want to do is develop in other ways, nuclear. We will have offshore wind. I don't think you want a huge expansion of onshore wind. There may be cases where it makes sense, but I think by and large we've established this now that offshore works very well. And by the way, it's providing quite a lot of our electricity already.
Some in your party would say that the target to reach net zero emissions by 2050 should be reconsidered in the wake of the energy crisis that we see. Sadita Helm, Professor of Energy Policy at Oxford University, who's recently an advisor to the Prime Minister, this week saying that target is hopelessly unrealistic. Do you think that the government is right to stand by net zero?
I think in the end, the world faces different threats. Right now, it's a Putin from the east. But you need to, we need to know that actually there are other threats which are going to destroy us through or make life very difficult and destroy communities through weather change. So we do need to tackle climate change. And actually, I don't think these two things are particularly incompatible. It so happens that reliance on hydrocarbons from Russia are part of what's causing the global energy price hike. So it actually makes sense to do a switch away from those things and to things which are renewable. So I think over the, we're talking about 2050 here, not tomorrow. So I do think it's still right to make sure that we aggressively pursue that. And Britain's got a huge lead in this. As I say, we've got the biggest wind farms in the world. We're leading on a lot of the different green technologies. So for us, it's new jobs, which is very, very welcome, and great expertise, which we are in turn starting to export. So I mean, I think it's good business for Britain as well.
OK, I just got a couple of other stories that I'd like to get your response to. Firstly, the Conservative MP, David Warburton, has had the whip withdrawn after allegations that were made against him in a report by the Sunday Times. Now, he said that he hasn't been contacted by the Complaints Authority. How are you responding to this?
Well, the party has, I think, withdrawn the whip and put this under the investigation, which needs to go through its process. I don't have any sort of further knowledge of it other than what I've read in the newspapers and what the party's said. Obviously, any allegations like this need to be taken extremely carefully, but all the facts will need to be brought out as well. So until we get there, I don't think there's much more I can hopefully add to it.
Do you have any concerns about the wider culture in Westminster?
I heard you ask the previous guest that. I have to say, I don't even know whether this took place in Westminster. For me, it's an office. You go in, you do your job, you're in the chamber, you get a bite to eat, you carry on with your work. It's certainly not the boozy place that it apparently once was many years ago. In my experience, I imagine, unless you go and seek these things out, and as I say, perhaps not in Westminster itself. I'm not sure.
OK. Now, there's one other thing that I was keen to ask you about this morning, and I think you touched on it slightly earlier in the interview. I understand you're taking in a family of Ukrainian refugees. Can you tell us a little bit about the family that you're in contact with and whether or not they've managed to make it to the UK yet?
Yeah, they are not here yet. We're hoping perhaps in the next week or so they will be. It's a three-generation family, so it's a mother, her mum, who's 75, her son, who's 6, and their dog, who's called Max. And we're looking forward to welcoming him here. They've been getting ready to leave, and we're excited to have them in our home.
What's been the reason for the delay in getting them to your house?
The mum was travelling on a. They fled. I mentioned about them being in a bomb shelter for several nights, and they fled out of Kyiv, reached. They're in Krakow right now in Poland. The mum only has a national, what they call a national passport. It's like an ID card, not a full international passport. So she has had to visit a visa office, whereas the others are able to travel without having travelled to a visa office. And then there was the complication of the pet, although I think we are keen to remove those complications as well. Because it looked like the dog might have at one point had to quarantine for 4 months, and I think there are moves afoot to prevent that from happening. So I mean, it is important. They're very understanding that you do need to know who is coming to the country, and it's not beyond Putin and his cronies to deceive Brits by sending people to live in the UK who may have the wrong motivations. But it does look to me like it's coming towards the end of the process, and I think they're looking at booking. We hope within the next week or so to join us. And the whole family is very excited. We're looking forward to them staying with us. It will be a bit of a squeeze, but we will make it work. And we're delighted to be able to do a small thing here.
And quickly before I have to let you go, the latest figures show that I think 32,000 people have applied for a visa under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. Only 4,700 have been issued. Do you have an update on those figures, and are they actually good enough?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I think we're going to see this cranked up fairly quickly. Just overall, 29,100 people have received visas under both the schemes, not just the Homes for Ukraine scheme. So 29,000 people, just over. I think we'll see the numbers with the Homes for Ukraine. That's where families like mine are bringing in Ukrainian families to come and live with us. We found ours through Facebook, I should say. I don't know the family at all, and of course there are some necessary checks before they come over. But I think we'll see those numbers expand very quickly, and it's unlimited. It's not capped. So and I tend to think of them not as refugees, but really as evacuees, because they want to go home. They want to return and rebuild their country. In the case of the family that we're having, the husband is still in Ukraine, so very, very keen. Of course, they'll be to get back to him as well.
OK, thank you very much for your time this morning, Grant Shapps there. Thank you.